Tonight, we wonder if we were technologically advanced in our past. It's time to get uncanny.
This Uncanny Earth is dedicated to the memory of Todd David Anderson.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 185 of This Uncanny Earth, the show that will never stop. We're going to keep going on like old Gunsmoke reruns that were like into the 90s, I guess. I don't know what we're doing.
There probably still are reruns, actually, because you got those Me TVs and you got that, I don't know, is that still a thing?
Yes, 100% is still a thing.
Yeah, because they've got, like, they change the names of those kind of things every couple of years. Last I knew it was Me TV, and maybe it'll be, like, Old Timey Granddad TV next year. I don't know.
That'll be you, like, in, 10 years, you'll be watching the old people TV shows. You'll be like, where's Bash and where's Hogan's Heroes?
Where's my Matlock? I gotta get my tea.
Where's my bat? Oh, I knew there was a demon in the car. I knew. Everyone, it's time for everybody's favorite part of the show, except for my co-host. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for Dad Jokes.
It's time for Dad
Jokes. I can't hear the music because only
I know you're missing out on the best part.
Some say the worst, but I'm not going to hate on those people. All right, are we ready?
Yeah, it's over. When I start talking, it's over.
So tonight's dad joke is brought to us by our Patreon donor, Leah Carpenter, and she sends this rib tickler in. Why didn't the lemon ride the roller coaster? Because he had a sour stomach.
You hear that? That's the sound of no laughing.
That's because you don't think it's funny, and I'm killing you slowly inside. That was the whole goal of my life, was to kill you slowly from dad jokes. From the inception. It's one of those, like, anime Hitman episodes. Like Go-Go 13. But
it's one of those weird episodes where they have to, like, they can't actually use a weapon to kill you. Like, they're restricted by some kind of rules. Like, so they have to just try really unorthodox methods. And
Listen. I had to go, like, so long without meeting you. Then when I met you, I had to, like, groom the friendship until we made a podcast. Then I made the podcast. I was like, hey, we should start telling dad jokes. And
that's
like,
what it
okay.
is.
And then...
That's what it is. And it's like a 15 season series. And it takes all that time up to season 12 to get to that point where you realize, oh, the whole thing is to try to kill the dude. And the dude doesn't even, like me, I don't even figure it out until season 14.
And then you don't figure it out at all and you die.
Maybe. Or actually, season 15, you actually, like, you give up and you tell a real joke, and that joke is funny. And that...
No, and then you laugh uncontrollably, and then you die from laughter. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And then your
exactly.
whole life has been a lie, and you've wasted all your time because you could have said, like, a really dumb joke from the beginning.
I mean, I do that paying taxes.
Click, click, click.
Ooh.
I don't pay taxes, so I don't know about all that.
Me either. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, if you catch my drift. So tonight we're talking, are we advanced in our past? And I believe we were. And we're going to start this off with what I like to call some nice, solid evidence, and that is the Baghdad battery. That's right.
Good call.
Now, yes, exactly. Now, it's roughly a 2,000-year-old battery found in the Kujat Rabu and dates back to the Parthian period. So you're looking at roughly 250 BC to 250 AD. Now, it's composed of a clay jar with a stopper composed of asphalt. An iron rod goes right through the middle, and it is housed in a copper cylinder. Now, for those of you that don't know, copper does a plethora of things. One, it's a good conductor of electricity, and two, it has healing properties. Many people think that, and these are conspiratorial folks. I'm not saying I'm one of them, but when the copper was taken out of people's homes and plastic piping was put in, it was said that health declined because copper has healing properties. Viruses, diseases that sit on copper do not last long because copper will kill them with a quickness. It is unknown what the exact uses for the Baghdad battery were, but scientists say that it was used to electroplate items such as putting a layer of one metal on the surface of another. Now, electroplating is a general name for processes that produce a metal coating on a solid substrate through the reduction of cations of that metal by means of a direct electric current. So basically what it does is it takes the metal, runs the electricity through it, and then that metal will adhere to the surface of whatever it is you are trying to cover. So like gold-plated necklaces would be an example. So if you have a silver necklace but you want to encase it in gold, electroplate it. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's what they do for gold-plated necklaces. So don't run out to that local mall shop that sells gold necklaces and be like, I know this is silver. I know you guys electroplated this. I'm just giving an example of how I think it would work. The fascinating thing about the Baghdad battery is that it's a battery and that's 2,000 years old. We tend to think that we are highly advanced, but this shows that maybe, just maybe, we were just as advanced back then. What do you think?
It's interesting because it generates what, like 1 volt of electricity, like a single volt, which doesn't seem very much to us, and it isn't. I mean, as far as the other things that we can do with electricity, but you got to think about the other technology that they might have had. Like, let's put it into perspective. Let's say that maybe they're turning water wheels, or they're working a loom, or they're just, the basic things that they have. They're not running TVs, they're not running radios that we know of, they're not running big, gigantic, like, console systems and everything like that. They don't have refrigeration as far as we know. They don't have all these things, so they don't need the amount of electricity that we have to run some of their simple machines. But a little bit of electricity could cause a big difference. Like, you start thinking about it, like, turn a water wheel and help that with automatic whatever, and generate more electricity from a turbine and things like that. They could have used a simple, small device like the battery to power something that could then generate more after that. Like a cascading level of different power. So it's really amazing. I mean, the type of things that you can imagine them doing with it are really super interesting. And I think that we're really just scratching the surface on what could be possible with something like that.
I have to agree with you, and I think too we don't know exactly what it ran.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that what they did was maybe like even a test model. Maybe that the actual battery itself they made, and this was just a test model. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That's kind of stuff you have to think of when you are dealing with technology in our ancient past. Is that what if all we're looking at is prototypes, and that they made the actual real thing, but the real thing didn't last as long, and so because of that, it wasn't able to last as long. You know what I mean?
Or even on just like a small scale. Like this is just this is pretty good sized for a battery. The Baghdad battery was about the size of like a car battery, the jar was, but it wasn't like, it didn't put out power like a car battery. It was just the size of that. But then you got to think, what if they had bigger? What if they had huge, massive versions of these that really put out a lot of power? But over time, they were like, you know what? We need this glass for other things. And they broke it down. Because that happened a lot in the ancient world, too. Like, we know the pyramids had the gold caps. They were removed because they needed them. In the Dark Ages, people would go to Roman roads and they would basically just dig up the bricks to build stuff with. Because it was easier than trying to figure out how to make your own or pay for your own. They would just go out and scavenge things. So what if that kind of same thing happened with versions of the Baghdad battery? Like, maybe they had huge, really large versions and they had vast amounts of power. But they were like, you know what? We really don't need this at this point in time. We need this other thing more. Let's break this down and make it.
Just like Noah's Ark. What if they broke that down too and then used the pieces and parts from it to make...
Yeah, I mean, people say it's like, oh, we can see an image on this mountain, we're going to find it. Well, why would they leave it there? You know, I mean, they just went through supposedly a global flood. They have no other building materials. Most of the trees are going to be new, right? So why wouldn't you take apart the thing and build your first town with it? You know, it just makes sense.
And that's what they did with a lot of ships that came over from England. They used the timber from the ships to make houses, to make different things so that the people could live. Like, you just have a ship sitting there and it's not doing anything. People actually use the resources that were needed to make houses, to make little boats for fishing poles, things like that. And that's the one thing people don't understand, is that those little things were part of something bigger at one time.
And it can explain why a lot of these things that we think, well, how would they have built such great structures if they didn't have these machines or these drills or this and that? Well, maybe they did, and then they needed to repurpose that stuff. Maybe they needed to recycle what they had and make something new out of it, and that's why we haven't found big industrial equipment that people say were used in like Pumapunku or whatever those other places are that had the really nice cut stones and everything. And the drill marks that showed like no boring holes and everything like that. Like, maybe we had to cut that stuff down and reuse it. It just makes sense. I mean, why wouldn't you? Ancient cultures were a lot better at reusing things than we are today.
And that's the thing. We throw away the stuff we use because it's perishable. They make stuff to where it's throwaway stuff. But in the olden days, they didn't do that. They didn't make stuff that was just throwaway. You had to use what you had to use. You know what I mean? Like, you could use a wooden spoon to stir stew with, or you could put it in the fire to use as kindling. That's the thing. Like, we don't do that. We use like a styrofoam container to hold food, then we throw it in the trash. We don't bother to use things or reuse things. And that, I think that's a problem too, why we have so many landfills, is because we don't use the things we were taught to use. We just use what is disposable. And I think here we see that as prime example. Like, I think the Baghdad battery itself is a prototype. I think the actual battery itself probably did more, but this was like some kid, you know what I mean, like some kid's science project, and it was just left over, and it was like, yeah, we don't use, and they didn't use it a lot. Like, they didn't use the Baghdad battery itself a lot because they found something better, and it just sat there and didn't get used. So what else are you going to do? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's a good point too. It's like, we find a lot of things from the ancient world that we wonder, oh my goodness, look at this fantastic thing. It could have done so many awesome feats of engineering. Why aren't there more of these? Like, what culture just made one of these and then didn't share it with everyone else? And so maybe, like, maybe they built something and maybe they thought it really wasn't, I mean, maybe it was useful, or maybe they thought this is just a starting point. We don't need to make more like this. Maybe it was just a stepping stone to something else that we haven't discovered, because whatever it was that we didn't discover is it, again, maybe it was repurposed because it was more important and it was made with more valuable materials.
I have to agree with you on that one. Essentially, I think that the Baghdad battery itself is just a normal project that didn't get to the development stage. Like, we see a lot of car concepts, right? And they're like, man, that car would never have driven. And I think the Baghdad battery was one of those. I think it was one of those that was like, this was our concept idea. And there's a lot of concept cars and ideas that you see that they find and that doesn't do anything. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Baghdad battery is one of those. So, and I think that the more we look back into our ancient past, the more we're going to find more concepts. And I think the less we're going to find of actual models of things that were viable, because I think that they made these things and they didn't have the shelf life that a concept does. Because a concept, if it only gets used once or twice, right, it doesn't get used. And it just sits in a garage. Like, for instance, they found a Nintendo PlayStation. So for those of you that don't know, the Nintendo PlayStation was a Super Nintendo that had a PlayStation CD-ROM drive attached. This was before the Nintendo and PlayStation split. They were going to make a CD-ROM drive because Final Fantasy VII was actually supposed to be on the Super Nintendo. It was supposed to be on the add-on, which is the PlayStation, and somebody found one, and it was a concept. And of course it's going to still run because if you don't use something, then as long as you keep it free of moisture and dust, it's still going to run. And I think the Baghdad battery is just another thing that has the same basic principle.
Mm-hmm. And that's a really good point. And again, I think we can point to a lot of examples as we go through the show tonight of things that we've misinterpreted almost because we believe that we know what they do, but we don't know why they do it. And we've come to the wrong conclusions about it. We've decided that it was for whatever reason, and then who knows? Like the Antikythera mechanisms, I'm sure we're going to get to at some point in the show. We think it was for one thing, but we've only found the one. And if it was something that was as important as what it sounded like, you would think there'd be more of them. And we've never found another one.
I think it was another prototype.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have so many prototypes of things that were made. Like you got to remember, like, what was the there was an old movie in the 80s where the guy made a bunch of inventions and none of them ever worked. And I think maybe the Baghdad battery could have been one of those. Maybe, you know, it was that didn't work. Does that make sense?
Or maybe it made something that people didn't need at the time. Like maybe he was like, oh, I can generate this spark, this light, this something or other, and it can cause this other thing to move. And people were like, so? We can already do that. We don't need that. What are we going to do with that? And it was like, okay, because maybe it was expensive to make. Maybe he didn't have access to the rest of the materials and things like that. So he just made the one. And so it didn't catch on.
And that's possible because the one thing we have to understand is if you don't have the funding to make something, it's just an idea in your head. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how many of these they actually found, but they might have found quite a few. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, they didn't find enough to actually ascertain what they did. I think if they had found more, it would have made sense. But the fact that they didn't find more is something that's very serious, I think. I think that it was a prototype. And I think that maybe the other Baghdad battery, somebody just walked by and said, oh, look, it's a stone. But it wasn't. It was something far different. Mm-hmm. But we see like the different Greek statues, right, that are very lifelike. And some people say that that was a weapon of some form that turned them into stone. Me and you have talked about these things. Medusa being a weapon, the god Balor being a weapon, holding a weapon. Mm. And I think to me, like, that is very important.
Some of the stuff, I think, like, we've decided that they were weapons or that they were monsters, and I think maybe they were for more industrial purposes. Like the Medusa example is, we have a process these days that we use for some sort of industrial something or other. It's for preserving like gases or preserving certain materials for transport and or for storage, and it's petrification. We're basically petrify it, we take all the moisture out, and we basically turn it kind of like stone. And then we have a way to like sample it later and reuse it. But that kind of makes me think maybe that's what Medusa was. Maybe it was just a machine that looked like it had a bunch of snakes for hair, because that's a bunch of wires, a bunch of pipes, a bunch of different things. And somebody would go in, they'd poke around at it, and it was set on automatic. If something entered its field of view, oh, okay, time to petrify this thing. There you go. And so a legend came out of that. I mean, I can't prove that, of course. I have no proof. It's just strictly an idea, just a theory. But there's other things from history like that. You've got that. You've got a lot of the other monsters from the Greek stories and from probably Egyptian stories and things too. They seem kind of like more like machines, more like automatons than they do actual creatures, because they're very one-tracked. They do one thing. And people have made big elaborate backstories for it. Like they said, Medusa was supposedly a Vestal virgin, and Poseidon, she was cursed because of what happened with Poseidon and things like that. But that's like after the fact kind of stuff. That's somebody maybe almost making a story to match what they've found, rather than the story creating what the actual thing was.
Right. And I think, too, what we have to understand is that these different legends all have ties to things in the here and now. You know what I mean? Petrification is a real thing. It actually happens.
Yeah.
You know, if something is waterlogged for so long, it can actually be petrified. You know?
Naturally and artificially.
And the fact that there's multiple tales of things being turned into stone is very important.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good example. I mean, that's just one of the many examples of things that we found throughout the history where some kind of monster does something to people. You've got that. You've got other things where monsters, like Balor had his lens, or his eyes, were supposedly able to set things on fire and to burn them, right? So, and we theorized when we talked about that episode, we theorized that maybe it was a charge, like it was charging up. And that's like a laser. That's like a laser beam that has to charge up to different levels of power to do different things, to cut different materials. And we already know that some natural things happen in the world that people used to use for supernatural purposes. Like, we know that there's that cave somewhere in... I don't know if it's in Greece or if it's in one of the neighboring countries, where supposedly there's a cave that's filled with noxious gases. And they said it was a gate to Hades, to the underworld. And they would send animals in to sacrifice. And because the gas is in there, the gases would kill the animals. And there's other places where, supposedly, where the Oracle of Delphi was, there was gases underneath that might not immediately kill you, but they'll make you super loopy and you might have hallucinations. So people go to see the Oracle, they go to this cave, they get these hallucinations, and, oh, I've seen visions. So we know that ancient people, at least some of them, were smart enough to use their environment in scientific ways, even if they presented it as mystical and as supernatural.
And I think, too, what we have is the idea that these places gave off these gases, but then there are other places like Nazca and places like that that didn't have that. They just had these things that could be seen from space, or like at least a hot air balloon level of sight. Mm-hmm. You know, these big birds, these ants, all of these things that existed then. And we're like, well, they just made them to make them, but did they make them to make them? And we also have tales of the trumpet in the Old Testament where they walked around 6 times, and we're like, well, did they charge that, or was it something that they just did? You know what I mean? It feels like you walk around 6 times, you're charging something. Like you're charging a sonic weapon. And we see that is paramount to different stories, not just biblical, but throughout all of history.
Mm-hmm. And it's similar. Important. Yeah, you've got that. That's a great example with Jericho and everything. Plus, you have the mystery of the Ark of the Covenant, which we've talked about before, where people who came into contact with it, direct contact, tended to suffer what seemed like radiation sickness. So even then, that could have been some sort of technology, like a power, some kind of power battery that they didn't know what else to do with it, so they figured it was holy and they stuck it in the box and carried it around. We don't know.
No. And the thing is, we don't know if the actual person that gave that to him was a higher intelligence or it was somebody from a different planet. And that's, I think, too, what else we have to understand is that it's not always about the text. You have to read deeper into the text, I think. And we're going to talk about that here coming up. But I want to make sure you don't have anything else you wanted to add.
No, right now we're just kind of meandering a little bit because there's a lot of ground to cover on this thing, and we can go a lot of different directions. Like I'm sure we'll bring up the sky machines from India at some point during the show, but I'm going to quit talking now so that we can get on to whatever you got going on first before I keep rambling on.
No, you're good. You can. This is the show for rambling. This is the rambling show. What I want to talk about next is the evidence of nuclear war in ancient India. Now, in the territory of Rajasthan, located in northwestern India, there is evidence of a nuclear blast. Now, found in a layer of radioactive cinder very close to Jodhpur was this radioactive decay that they were able to pick up. And it mimicked Nagasaki and Hiroshima for the amount of radioactive soil that it had. And one thing we need to understand is that Jodhpur is one of the second biggest cities in the territory of Rajasthan, and it's also the historical capital of the Kingdom of Marwar. Now, whenever you have that history, then you also have other things that relate. The remnants of Harappa in the north and Mohenjo-daro in the west were uncovered in Pakistan. Now, Mohenjo-daro was worked in 2500 BC and was rediscovered in the 1920s. So what that means is it was actually older than 2500 BC. It was just worked in 2500 BC. In the 1920s, when the road excavations were uncovered, or the road level, 44 skeletons were found dissipated throughout the entire city. This points to an idea that their passing was unexpected and then sudden. Evidence of an impact epicenter showed signs of articles being intertwined, glassified, and rocks being dissolved by temperatures around 1500 degrees Celsius and then transformed into a glass-like material, much like parts of the Sahara were found. Now, it is said that what was found at Mohenjo-daro mirrors that of the impacts and fallout occurring both at Nagasaki and Hiroshima.
Now that's exactly where I was going next, actually, because supposedly they have stories in the Vedics, which are like their histories and things like that. They have really detailed, super highly detailed, supposed mythical histories of India. And a lot of it details the conflicts of the gods that they had at the time, and they used to float around in these flying fortresses, which is another one nod already to some kind of technology. And they used to use these huge weapons that would just cause vast amounts of damage. And then we find real life evidence of possible nuclear attack. I've heard people say that it was actually meteorite or something like that, and a lot of meteorites we have that we know of, not all of them cause radioactivity. Like we know that some of them cause devastation on large levels. Like we know sometime in the distant past, before we even existed, there was the one in the Yucatan that supposedly was instrumental in killing off the dinosaurs. But it wasn't nuclear. It just caused a lot of devastation from being so big of a strike on the planet. So you can say maybe it's a meteorite, but the fact that that it'd be meteorite and be radioactive at the same time, it's a little more slim. Like it looks more likely that it would be some kind of something that was already radioactive. And the only things we know of that have that level of radioactivity are atomic weapons.
Which the Mahabharata war is proof positive of that in and of itself. The idea that we had a nuclear war at one point is astounding, honestly. To me, I think what we're seeing is, and a lot of people will chalk it up to gods and things like that, but what if it's just an advanced group of people that had this technology that gave it to other people like ourselves, and then we ran with it and destroyed a bunch of stuff?
Mm-hmm. And it's definitely a possibility. And it's the same thing is recorded in other sources also. Like back in my favorite area of the world, in Samaria, they one of the reasons that part of the kingdom of Samaria fell, they were attacked from various sides, from other different tribes, from the Akkadians and different things who took over. But one of the reasons that they lost a lot of the power to fight back against that stuff is because there was an event. There was some kind of battle between the gods, and during the battle, an quote evil wind was generated. And this evil wind, you think, okay, evil wind, whatever, sounds kind of, just mythology. But wherever it traveled, you couldn't run from it. It would eventually catch up to you. You couldn't see it. You couldn't hear it. It would just show up. It was like an invisible something. And when it caught up to you, your hair would fall out. Your fingernails would start falling off. Radiation sickness. All this stuff is you wouldn't be able to keep down food. All of this is radiation sickness. It would kill people. It would kill animals. All that kind of stuff. And then it would keep moving. And that's very reminiscent of radioactive fallout. Because fallout will spread from where an impact was, and it'll just keep spreading in concentric circles until eventually it runs out of steam. And even then, for years afterwards, in an area that's been hit with radioactivity at that level, if you go in there, like if you go and hang around in Chernobyl, I mean, right now it's probably not the best time, I'm just saying for hypothetically, but if you were to go hang out there for any length of time, you might start coming down with some of these symptoms because the fallout is still there from the reactor. And it's interesting to read these sort of things in ancient accounts because we like to think, well, they wouldn't have these kind of things back then. So how do you explain the glass sand? How do you explain the radioactivity levels in certain areas of the soil? How do you explain what they wrote about? Things like the evil wind that did these things. You don't know.
And the thing is, the war itself was started in 5000 BC. So, and it was actually between a group of gods. And the funny thing about all this is that it was over a dice game. Like, literally it was over a dice game. And the deceit was by Duryodhana, and it caused the Pandavas to transfer their entire territory to the Kauravas and go into exile for 13 years. Now, the dispute arose after Duryodhana refused to return the territories after they found the deceit. So he was like, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm keeping all of this. Well, you deceived us, yeah, but I'm still going to do whatever I want. Now, the funny thing is, in the 18 days, this is the interesting part of it. There were 1.6 million warriors killed in 18 days. And 50,000 Vrishnis and Ankar in one day. So, like, the Vishnis and the Ankar were basically like gods, I would guess. And the epic tales of the Mahabharata talk of celestial weapons, including airships, which we all know from Ancient Aliens being the Vimanas, men in spacesuits, space travel, planetary orbits, human cloning, and more. Now, it was said that gods and demigods provided these technologies, but what if it wasn't gods and demigods that provided these? What if it was actually advanced humanoid species that came back and people worshipped as gods?
And it's super interesting because one of the things that we've talked about before, probably on the show and outside of the show, is that personally I think that a lot of our ancient heroes, like people like Hercules and all these other people, I think these weren't necessarily demigods, so to speak. I think these were exceptional people because of something in their background, something in their genes that made them special. And you can say, oh, well, yeah, it was because they were demigods. But if you cut that part out and you just say, okay, what if there's a more natural explanation? They might have been descended from a different stock of people that were slightly superior to us in a lot of areas, or they might have been genetically altered in ways that the rest of us weren't in a certain area of prehistory, because again we have stories like that. So you have all these other ways that you could explain these ancient demigods and these ancient heroes and things, and it starts to put a lot of things in perspective. It starts to make you really wonder about a lot of these old stories and conflicts and things, and how they came about, and what weapons they used, and why perhaps our ancestors were as primitive as they were, not because they began to be as primitive, but because they were rendered primitive by mass destruction. Maybe everything was just destroyed so badly that they had no choice. They had to go back to as simple a life as possible. They couldn't even record it because they were that traumatized. And so we don't have any other records other than it turned into religions and spiritualities.
So the one thing that they did have were called astras. And so, like you said, what they had was these deities, right? But they gave them these celestial weapons. Now, they're not wielded by hand. Instead, they are invoked by chanting a mantra, which reminds me of a password, and they're directed through a medium such as an arrow. They need no physical effort, but rather strong mental will to invoke, direct, and implement. Now, what that reminds me of is, if you've ever seen the people that sit at NORAD and they look at these different screens that show, like, the best thing I can say is they show like radars and things like that. It takes a lot of concentration and knowing how to read that kind of stuff to, in fact, learn how this stuff works, like air traffic controllers and stuff. And this looks exactly like that. It seems exactly the same to me, that they needed to be able to have maximum concentration. You know, if you're an air traffic controller, you have to direct, however many planes are in the air at that time in order to land a plane safely, right? And I think this here shows that whatever they were doing, they were directing these missiles, they were directing these different ideas, they were directing these different weapons at one specific target.
Really intense focus, really deep analytical skills. And if we take that a step further, depending on how far you kind of want to believe that the technology might have been advanced, they could have even had, like, we know right now, folks like Elon Musk are talking about neural chips, about putting chips in your head that can control social media and all this other kind of stuff. And you think, oh man, that's crazy. But what if people already had that idea? What if people had that idea and it was to activate, as security precautions, it was to activate their weaponry or to activate certain equipment? Like you said, passwords, focus, that kind of thing. It could have been even like we have games where, like the Riddick series, he goes to that Butcher Bay prison, which is one of our favorite games, by the way, and he can't use most of the guns because they're quote unquote DNA encoded. It means they're matched to the guards that use them by being keyed to their DNA. So what if something like that is keyed to certain passwords and things? Like, people can't use these highly advanced equipment without knowing what the activation key code is, or the passphrase or whatever, and if they have a neurological link to it of some kind. You think it's kind of silly, but we're not far from that right now. Like, right now, there's I'm sure there's actually people who've made the technology. It's just not stuff that we've heard of just yet. Like, I don't think Musk is the first person to suggest it. I'm sure there's probably been military tests and all kinds of things. But if you think back, it's possible that maybe what we consider the demigods and heroes of the past actually had access to this kind of technology. And once they passed or were defeated in combat or whatever, they took that technology with them.
Yes. Or maybe that technology to them wasn't advanced anymore. Maybe it was just old technology. You
Mm-hmm.
know, we see a lot of different tanks and different World War II relics just sitting outside of different places these days. You can drive by an army recruiter place
Mm-hmm.
and see a bunch of tanks just sitting there and they're decommissioned. So
Yep.
maybe that stuff was just decommissioned. They found more advanced technology, which could be including maybe things that send other people to different dimensions. You know,
Could be.
like it's
Could
stuff
be.
like that. Yeah, it 100% could be. Now, a thing to note that the Astros themselves could cause destruction through arrows, fire, and radiation. Some could cause confusion, unconscious, or sleep. And the Sudal Sana given by Vishnu was said to be the most destructive of all. It would generate a hot ray, reddish sky, and a fireball, and is believed to be a nuclear weapon. It was believed that as a result of this launch, it created layers upon layers of hot rays that penetrated the sky and then settled on Earth. It was also said that the nuclear cloud and heat wave were noticeable in the areas of tens of kilometers wide and approximately 10 nautical miles in thickness. So you have to wonder, like, maybe that these Astros were just a name for weapons.
Mm-hmm.
Like we use the word weapons, which could mean bat, it could mean a nail gun, it could mean whatever our courts deem a weapon to be. Maybe Astros were just another word for weapon, because confusion, unconsciousness, sleep. We have did shows on places that got hit with weird energy weapons and that the people were confused, discombobulated, caused tumors. Maybe this is like a sound thing. We did a show on sound waves and sound weapons. Well, not the
Yeah.
whole show, but like we had, shows on that. And maybe it's the exact same thing.
And that's really kind of relevant because right now they're still working on figuring out what causes quote unquote Havana syndrome, which is a new thing because of what happened in we had an embassy in Cuba, I believe it was, in Havana, Cuba, and we were having the U.S. When I say we, the United States was having various people who worked there come down with this sickness, and they decided it was based on something that was attacking them through their hearing. It was some kind of a sonic weapon. And we still don't know what it is. We've decided that yes, it was a sonic weapon of some kind, but we haven't figured out what it is. We haven't figured out where it was shot from. We haven't figured out who was using it, and it's struck more places since then. And the theory that I've had, and then I've shared with a few people, is that it seems like that right now they're just tests. Right now they're real world testing of some kind of sonic weaponry. And some group out there, or even some other government, or even our own government, who knows, maybe we're testing it on our own people, which we have been known to do. It's a test for a new kind of sonic weapon, because we already know we've got laser technology. The Chinese have it. The United States has it. We're testing these microwave lasers that can cook people from miles away and things like that. And so we're at a level where some of these ancient stories of weird, fantastic, devastating weapons that the gods used, supposedly, we're at that level where some of those things are happening right now, and we've developed them. So it's a super interesting time. It's kind of dangerous. When I say super interesting, I'm kind of like, oh yeah, we got all these great weapons, it's awesome. I don't really mean that. I mean kind of like, it's interesting to see them compared to these old accounts and to realize that perhaps we're catching up to where that level was. And hopefully we don't do the same thing that they did and completely massacre our entire civilization.
Right, right, because we don't want to destroy our whole civilization, finding some old technology we don't know how it works, and then boom, we touch a button and everything blows up. And I think that we need to understand that the similarities between things, I think, point to a logical conclusion that mankind gets really powerful and then blows themselves up. Like, we blew ourselves up in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. and the Bikini Atoll Islands and Nevada and all of those places and New Mexico, and we're like, yeah, we're just gonna throw these nukes out in the desert. I'm sure it won't hurt anything, right? But then we come to find out that people played in those areas where they detonated nuclear weapons, and they developed different conditions from that. And what we see too is the fact that these things, like for instance, the chakras that were basically WMDs. One of the most powerful, like I said before, was the Sudarsana, and it was considered a nuclear weapon. And they go on to talk about that it could only be manifested through mantras and keywords. Now, mantras and keywords sounds like passwords to me. And they were written in old ancient scriptures, and they existed in historical periods. Now, here's the thing. When you launch these things, you had to have the correct password. Something that this reminds me of, and they say that like if you didn't have that, it could be detrimental to anything that was in the area, which reminds me of what? A self-destruct mechanism, that being, if you did not enter in the correct password, you might blow yourself up.
Yeah, it's there's plenty of movies, plenty of shows, plenty of games we have where if you're going to set off or fire a rocket of some kind, you have to have two people with two separate keys, and you have to get authorization from like three people above you, and all these different things. And that's not too far from the truth. I mean, there are a lot of supposed safeguards before you can actually launch something of that magnitude, and it's almost happened at least once. Like, we have that famous story where there was supposedly a computer glitch that caused Russian radar to show a bunch of planes coming in. I think it was Russian radar, and they were like, "Oh, we're being attacked by the United States or from somebody. We need to start launching the nukes." And they went almost all through the process, but one guy was like, "Hey, this doesn't look right. There's something not right about this. I can't authorize this." And everybody around him's going, "Oh, if you don't, we're all going to be murdered because they're launching their own weapons. We're all going to die." He's like, "No, I can't." And it ended up it was just a glitch. Like, nobody had launched anything. And if they had gone through the whole process, that's the end. That's nuclear warfare on an accident.
Right. And I think with this, it was like, it's like, we don't want this stuff to be found by people that might beat us in this war. And a lot of times when they did that, when they had wars where people wanted to come and get their technology, right? They would be like, okay, we're going to set a self-destruct mechanism, and so is actually going to activate this self-destruct mechanism. And it's kind of like a fail-safe to keep people from finding that technology. And what I think, and one of the reasons why I don't think we ever found a lot of this old technology is maybe there were fail-safes used for that. So like all these people that are like, we go into these temples and all of a sudden there's a cave in. What if that temple held something so discreet and so like deadly that the only thing they could do was put a self-destruct mechanism in? So like if somebody hit a wrong switch or somebody didn't know the answer to a puzzle, think Indiana Jones, and maybe it was that thing that they did that caused the place to destruct. And they're like, oh yeah, it was a cave-in on this 10,000-year-old pyramid that didn't have anything but some stone relics, but really it was an ELE or an extinction level event device that could have blown apart the entire world, like when Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Randy Savage shook hands. They thought that was going to blow the whole planet up. Little joke for you guys out there.
But yeah, that's a good point, because especially with things like the pyramids, like we're still told to this day that the pyramids are supposed to be tombs. And the big pyramids from the Giza Plateau, no evidence that anybody was ever going to be buried there. No evidence that anybody was buried there. Plenty of treasures, plenty of things stashed away, but no bodies, no funerary anything there. So, and then you find out that there's damage in different places, and you have to wonder, well, what else could have been housed there, and would they have taken steps to protect it? I mean, if most of the actual... We assume that ancient people are going to have traps like spears and blow darts and all these other kind of things. But what if the actual traps are long gone? They were already tripped. They blew themselves up. All evidence of them is gone because they're destroyed. And so all we have left is what everybody else has put in afterwards, thinking, oh, well, we have to try to protect whatever was in there and keep people from in there, so it's just the attempt of the people that came afterwards who didn't have that technology anymore. So it makes sense.
And those could have been traps like there's the big traps, and maybe they were like, let's just put some blow darts here just in case somebody, if they make it through the whole thing, the blow darts are like a last-ditch effort, or like in Indiana Jones, if you remember in The Last Crusade, that invisible path, right? Yep. That they had to throw pebbles on in order to get across. Maybe there was something like that too, where they had like a quartz stone that they shine light on, and you can't see it with the naked eye, but you stepped on it. You know what I mean? And a lot of times movies and things take their inspiration from history. So what if, like you said, all these little like goofy like things that kill people, like the Curse of Tutankhamun and all that, was just like the low level traps? Everybody's like, oh my God, you got to watch out for the falling boulder. When really like that was like a last ditch effort to keep the secrets hidden from the populace. Because to me, the last thing you want, if you have ELE level weapons, the last thing you want is them getting into people's hands or the enemy. A lot of people don't know that, but Pakistan and India are actually really, really at each other's throats.
Oh, yeah.
There have been nuclear war talks between Pakistan and India that people have never heard. They just automatically go, I didn't know about Pakistan and India. What?
Yeah, we've come close to those two countries basically destroying the world like many times over the last like 50, almost 100 years at least that we know of. You just don't hear about it because we're not involved. We don't have the United States doesn't have a direct stake in either one of those countries. We're busy in our other places. Not to downplay anything. I don't want to, I'm not touching on any hot buttons that are current right now. I don't want anybody to think I'm making light of any other situations. I'm just saying that right now, India and Pakistan, it might come up in the news every couple of years that, oh yeah, there's a standoff, there's a nuclear standoff. It's not just like a one line in the newspaper and then, okay, on to the next story. It's serious business. They hate each other. And
they really hate each other.
Any
and
day
you have to
now.
wonder if this whole Mahabharata thing is a centuries-old dislike between Pakistani people and Indians. They just do not like each other. A lot of people think Russia or the United States or North Korea are the ones that are going to be the ones that do the whole nuking thing. But if we look at Pakistan and India, we see that the nuclear tension there is something that people should actually be genuinely concerned of, not Russia. Because to me, and here's the thing, this is how I reconcile all this. Russia, North Korea, the United States, all they do is talk about, we have nuclear weapons, we'll bomb you back into whatever century. That's all they do is talk. And what I've noticed with big threats, quote unquote, is that the big talkers never produce. But here's India and Pakistan that have never been like, we're going to nuke everything. They're just like, we'll nuke each other, right? And nobody ever says a thing about that. However, they're worried about Russia nuking the place or North Korea nuking the place. Let me just say something. First of all, Russia isn't going to nuke anything because they're not going to destroy anything because they want to take over everything. So that's just a bluff. Saudi Arabia, all those places in the Middle East that talk about nukes, they are the same way. They don't want to nuke anything where they can take over. North Korea can't even launch a nuclear missile that doesn't hit their own water. But Pakistan and India, that's the ones I would be concerned about with a nuclear war because they're not talking to anybody else. They're not threatening the United States. They're not threatening Europe. They're threatening each other. right? They're literally
On
like,
a daily
listen,
basis, just about.
on a daily basis. They're literally on Twitter like, I'll fight you, bro. Send you peeps. And then he's like, what's good? What's really good? Well, I'll see you. I'll see you. And to me, like, those are the two folks I would worry about. I'm not worried about any other country. I'm worried about them two starting some stuff, you know? And I think that's something we need to keep an eye on. But I think that dates back to such a time when those countries were maybe the two ancient races that hated each other. Maybe they, in fact, were the Kauravas and the Pandavas. And they just keep that feud going, much like the Hatfields and McCoys of today.
Could be. It could very well be, and then maybe the whole evidence that we have of the detonations in India resulted from the beginnings of that conflict, and maybe the conflict has gone on since then.
It's 100% possible. Well, this has been a fantastic episode, I think. I think we really covered a lot of ground revolving around the idea. We went pretty much into the Baghdad battery, the ancient nuclear war, but I think that solidifies where we come from, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's a lot of ground to cover, honestly, and we could. This is another show where we could have gone on for another 3-4 hours probably, but
easily,
it's one of those things where people would need to do a lot of research.
Yes, and there's more technology that we didn't even talk about, the Antikythera mechanism.
Yeah.
Which we can get into another time. There'll definitely be a part 2 of this. Next week, I want to get into genetics a little bit and a theory that I have revolving around genetics. And we'll get into that next week. Is there anything you wanted to add before we get up out of here?
No, I don't think so. Just a quick reminder, make sure that you're following us on all of our various things. Go to the This Uncanny Earth, sorry.
I thought you were Mike Tyson in the whole thing there for a second. It's very.
Go to our This Uncanny Earth group on Facebook.
We love you, Mike Tyson. Please don't beat us up.
It is a private group, but I don't think I've turned anybody down in a long time. I think we've only removed maybe one person over the entire time.
If that.
Well, yeah, there's been one person, but that was for very good reason. Not to get into anything.
Yes.
But we're pretty accepting of everybody, so definitely join that. Check out the YouTube channel, This Uncanny Earth on YouTube. Check out our other various outlets. I know the Uncanny Spirits Club has been a little quiet, but I'm probably going to do another video probably in the near future. So check that out. This Uncanny Gaming. You still doing your streaming pretty regular, right?
Still am, yes. You can check me
out. So
follow
on that.
Twitch.tv/This Uncanny Gaming. Come check me out. I'm playing Elden Ring.
Always with the Elden Ring. But
always.
we've got all these different things we've got going on. Definitely check out all our various outlets and avenues, and we would love to hear any questions, comments, etc. on any of these things that you guys have for us. And don't forget that if you really like what we're doing, and if you want to give us a helping hand to keep bringing you more great content like all of the things I just mentioned, hop over to the Patreon, drop us $1 or $2. We don't have a lot going for it right now, honestly, and I don't want to blow smoke at you.
But once we get This Uncanny Dark comes on, there's going to be a lot going on, trust me.
Oh, yeah, we got stuff in the works, and right now it's mostly if you just want to be that added level of support, which we would appreciate. We'll always appreciate that. And
we always need the support to keep the lights on, because the lights are dimming.
Definitely. We got trips planned in the early stages, different things, but nothing concrete. I don't want to get anybody's hopes up just yet, and I think that's all I'm going to remind everybody of.
I have another speaking engagement. I'll be getting into more of that as it gets closer. That's it, guys. Next week, we're going to be talking about genetic abnormalities and where I think they come from. Anyways, guys, thank you for listening. As always, we appreciate everything you guys do. Shout out to our Patreon donors. You guys help keep the lights on. Thank you so very much. And as always, why be boring when you can be uncanny? We'll see you folks next week.